Now each day's racing comprises of 2 events, a scratch event and a handicap event, and we'll be keeping you up to date throughout the week's racing with boat positions and current standings. So let's now join race commentators Bill McCartney and 3-times world champion Rob Brown.
Gestetner, skippered by Dave Cummings, the Irishman, the one tip to possibly knock the champion off his crown. Davey Cummings sailing Gestetner.
Of the TUI's International Cup sees Dave Cummins bringing Gestetner over the line in first position. Bill Barnett and the Xerox crew sailing safely for second, with Ella Bache placing third.
Wow, that seems like a lifetime ago. You know, I don't talk about it much, but I'm really pretty proud of my achievements sailing with some of the best sailors in the world in a class that technologically was an advancement for sailing in general, and certainly the fastest monohulls going around even today. Back in the 80s, life was about making that boat go as fast as we could. It was about racing, it was about competition. We weren't thinking about environmental issues. Up here in the Wide Bay, there's a man called John Sinclair, and he was certainly thinking about these issues. I thought we might spend this episode, go down into the bowels of Fraser Island and check out what was going on. Let's sheet on, head on down. Normally when you're passing north or south, a really nice thing to do is to come through the Great Sandy Straits, because you can enter down in the south via the Wide Bay Bar. You come in and then you've got this lovely little passage to get you through, and then you make your way north and a fairly relaxed way from there. So people often pass by here and they don't stop, they just keep going because they're on a mission. This isn't quite halfway, we're a little closer to the Hervey Bay end, very well protected, and probably one of the few places that if the breeze is from the southwest, you still get a little bit of protection. It's really calm, you get no swell. The tide runs pretty hard, so it can run up to 3 and 4 knots, so just be careful when you're anchoring. Even though there's lots of sandbanks and sandbars surrounding us, that because the tide runs hard, it scallops out these deep channels so that you can anchor just off the beach. So we're anchored in about 10 meters of water, and yet from where we're sitting I can basically, if I wanted to, dive off the boat and be standing in knee-deep water when I come up. So if you're casting by, South White Cliffs Ungower is undoubtedly a beautiful spot. At first glance, this whole area looks green and lush, and it's certainly a testimony to the regrowth after all of the logging that went on. But to give it some context, way back in 1842, when William Pettigrew first came past this area, this is how he described this bit of land that we're looking at. The traveller strikes a living wall of giant trees, carries 80 feet to the first limb and 10 feet wide, and it's all buried in a jungle so thick the tracks need to be cut to pass through. And back in the day, he didn't see it as a land of natural beauty and something to be preserved. He just saw it as an opportunity to cut down trees and sell it to the Sydney market, where the housing boom was well underway and they were looking for timber. A bit like how in the war they bombed Lady Musgrave and Lady Elliot Island and Fitzroy Reef. Now, they were just islands that were way off the coast and no one was ever going to go there, so they weren't concerned about the beauty, they were just saw it as bombing practice. John Sinclair described this area as the natural Mona Lisa. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Castle, but if you haven't, you should. The Castle is about a family, a down-to-earth family, who were evicted from their house because the government wanted to take over their land so that they could expand the airport. And it's basically a movie about them and their fight to save their land. The reason why I mention that is because I can't help but feel that maybe the local Butchulla people, who are the traditional owners of this land, they might have felt exactly the same thing and had exactly the same frustrations. You see, in 1860 they made a deal with the government that the government said, you can have the land and it's your right to have the land, and we won't do anything without your permission. By 1862 they decided that the timber's too good and there's too much going on, we actually don't really want to do that, and they reversed that decision. By 1877 William Hart and Co had started logging, and that continued for the next century. Although there isn't any today because we haven't had any rain, or hadn't had enough rain, it's a beautiful little estuary that goes up, and at the end of it you'll find a nice little running waterfall, and you'll also get some fresh water if you need it. But not today! So once logging was established here, you can see why they chose Ungower as their spot to deliver timber to Maryborough. It is a relatively deep channel. That channel goes deep right to the shoreline, so they didn't have to make a long jetty to get out there, and then it's a smooth, calm and easy ride all the way up to Maryborough. It kept a lot of people very rich and very happy, not the Butchulla people, and there was a considerable trouble that went on here. In the early 70s, John Sinclair got a little bit jacked at what was going on. He could see his Mona Lisa being decimated, first by logging and then also by the sand mining. He started FIDO, Fraser Island Defence Organisation, and at that time he took the Bjelke-Petersen to court, and if you know much about Joh Bjelke-Petersen, or Sojo, he was a feisty character and there was long and heated battles, and certainly the Maryborough community were very concerned about their future and what he was doing, and he became a bit of an outlaw to them. They wouldn't serve him food, they wouldn't serve him drinks, and he became basically ostracised in his own town. In the heat of the battle, the miners were saying and the loggers were saying, we're only going to take 1%, it doesn't really matter, it's going to be okay, you'll barely notice it. To which his response was to use the analogy of the Mona Lisa, and was to say, well, you're going to scratch 1% of the Mona Lisa? Which 1% are you going to scratch? You scratch one bit, you ruin it all. So that was his catch cry, and it must have been pretty effective, because eventually he won that case and all mining and logging was ceased here on Fraser Island, and then he turned his attention to getting World Heritage listing, which he subsequently did. Now, in the intervening years, in 1977 he became Australian of the Year for his efforts here, and certainly he was in the Hall of Fame for several environmental organisations. Not only did the infrastructure for the jetties and things get left to ruin, but also the barges that were used to carry the logging and the sand were also left. There's two barges left, the Ceratotus, which is in Ceratotus Creek, and also the Palmer, which is up in Deep Creek. Now there's several different explanations about how they ended up here. Some say they were just left to rack and ruin. But, a cyclone came along and washed them up into their respective places, and that's where they were laid to rest. They're fantastic little structures. They've probably seen a lot better days, and maybe one day they'll be removed, but for the time being, not only are they a conspicuous spot for yachtsmen as they sail past to know that that's where we're going, but also just to have a little motor and have a look around. With the sand mining and the logging finally finished, This beautiful island now being a World Heritage listed national park. We have John Sinclair to thank for that. The last thing that really is on the agenda now is the handing back of country to the Butchulla people. I know that there's been some lip service done for them, but really the government's been doing a bit of ducking and weaving about actually handing back the land. And maybe, just maybe, now is the time to hand back what is rightfully theirs. Well, that's it for this episode of Wild Goose Adventures. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, feel free to give it the like button. You're totally awesome if you're subscribed, and also press the little bell, and that way you get firsthand anything that I will put up. I'd like to leave you with 3 Butchulla laws. Firstly, always do the right thing by the land. It comes first. Secondly, don't steal or take from anybody. And thirdly, if you have plenty, share it around. Until next time, smooth sailing.